Some phrases, whispered in your ear or tossed out like casual barbs, carry the weight of invisible worlds. Words that, on the surface, seem harmless, even familiar, almost like a commonplace exchange in the intimacy of a relationship. But what happens when your inner radar, that subtle intuition, that little voice in the depths of your soul, stirs and whispers a warning, a slight tremor telling you that something doesn't quite ring true? What if these seemingly simple phrases are actually keys to decoding a relational dynamic that could slowly, insidiously, drain your vital energy, disconnect you from your own inner power, and lead you away from who you truly are? It's time to listen more attentively, with the ear of your heart and mind, to these signals. Today we're going to dive into the heart of these alarm bells, not with a spirit of judgment, but with a desire for deep understanding enlightened by the timeless wisdom of Jung, that pioneer in the exploration of the human soul. Together, we'll explore how the unconscious, that vast inner territory, and the shadow, that part of ourselves we often prefer to ignore, repress, or project onto others, manifest eloquently in the theater of our relationships. Understanding these mechanisms is already the beginning of protecting yourself. It's initiating a movement to reclaim your personal sovereignty, to reclaim your vital space. Because knowledge, when integrated, becomes power. The power to choose, the power to heal, the power to align with your deepest truth. You may have already felt that subtle discomfort, that indefinable emotional fatigue that settles in after a conversation, after a shared moment. That diffuse feeling of being in a fog, as if your own inner compass were suddenly demagnetized, leaving you disoriented, uncertain. Perhaps you believed, for a long time, that you were the only one experiencing this inner saturation, carrying what overflows in the other person, feeling invested with the unspoken mission of maintaining harmony at all costs, even if it meant forgetting yourself in the equation, putting your own needs on mute. What you feel, what you have felt, is valid. It's by no means proof of weakness, nor a fertile imagination. It's the manifestation of sensitivity, a precious ability to perceive dissonant frequencies in the energetic field of a relationship. A true gift if we learn to listen to it and honor it. And what if this hypervigilance, this almost instinctive ability to feel the vibes, to decode the unspoken, the hidden intentions behind words, wasn't a burden, but an incredibly refined inner guidance system? A precious ally for navigating the sometimes murky, sometimes tumultuous waters of human relationships. Today, together, we will try to transform this perception. These specific phrases, these formulations that return like leitmotifs from certain mouths, we will dissect them, scrutinize them with conscious awareness, not to accuse or condemn, but to understand their true meaning, their impact on our psyche and our energy. The objective is clear: to give you back the reins of your energy, your choices, and ultimately, your inner peace. So, let's lend an ear with new acuity to these words that often resonate as subtle yet powerful warnings from our soul. The first of these phrases, often draped in a false claim of authenticity, deserves our full attention. It is uttered with a conviction that can be disarming. You have to accept me as I am. Ah, that one. It sounds like an ode to raw authenticity, doesn't it? A request for unconditional love, a legitimate aspiration to be loved for who one is, with strengths and weaknesses. On the surface, it's hard to object to. But listen carefully to the whisper behind the words, the vibration it gives off. What does this injunction, often delivered with a kind of passive ultimatum, really hide? In many cases, it conceals a fierce resistance, even a categorical refusal to change, to personal evolution, to self-questioning. It's sometimes the comfortable excuse, the ideal smokescreen to justify the perpetuation of harmful, even toxic behaviors. Insidious emotional manipulation that plays on the sensitive chord of acceptance, a chronic and cleverly disguised evasion of the responsibilities inherent in any adult relationship, or even that passive aggression, that wall of silence or veiled reproaches that undermines daily life and poisons the atmosphere. The shadow, in Jungian terms, is that part of our personal unconscious where our repressed aspects reside, our traits judged undesirable, our unexpressed potentials. By refusing to visit this part of himself, to dialogue with it, to work on his own shadow areas, to integrate and transform them, this man is in reality asking you to bear the weight of his immobility, his refusal to grow. He's asking you to accept not his authentic being in its entirety, which would include a willingness to evolve, but rather the stagnation of his most problematic aspects. Accepting the other is fundamental, yes. It's a pillar of any healthy and loving relationship. But it must never, ever mean tolerating the unacceptable, what deeply hurts you, what diminishes you, what extinguishes your light. True authenticity, you see, always comes with humility in the face of life, a sincere desire for personal evolution, an acute awareness of one's own perfectibility. No one is a finished product. The risk, if you yield to this injunction without discernment, you'll find yourself inexorably alone, doing all the emotional labor, rowing against the current to keep the relationship afloat, trying to build a solid bridge to someone who has decided to camp on his shore, stubbornly refusing to do his part, to grow in awareness and responsibility. Your precious energy, that vital force that animates you, then becomes exhausted, compensating for his lack. His inertia and your own radiance, your joy of living, are inevitably tarnished, weakened. Is this the resonance of a fulfilling relationship, a partnership where each contributes to the elevation of the other? The question deserves to be asked with complete honesty, and from this initial stance of non-evolution often stems another way of shirking responsibility, by blaming the past and those who populated it. Let's move on to another common tune. A classic heard time and time again, a toxic refrain that should immediately set off your internal warning lights, like a fire alarm in the quiet of your hopes. All my exes were crazy, toxic. A statement that, at first glance, might even evoke a form of compassion, making you feel like you're the one who will finally understand him, save him from these painful past experiences. But let's look closer. When a man systematically, and without the slightest nuance, portrays all his former partners as the sole and absolute source of all woes, all disappointments, all relational failures, without ever sketching the slightest introspection, the slightest questioning of his own share of responsibility, what is he really telling you about himself? What does he reveal about his emotional maturity and his ability to build a healthy relationship? He's telling us, deafeningly, despite the sometimes plaintive tone, of his glaring inability for self-analysis, for constructive self-questioning. He's telling us about a deeply ingrained victim mentality, an emotional immaturity that prevents him from seeing and assuming his own contribution to past failures. Carl Jung taught us the fundamental concept of projection. We have a natural, often unconscious tendency to attribute to others the aspects of our own shadow that we don't want or can't see in ourselves. By systematically demonizing his exes, by labeling them, he projects onto them his own unresolved flaws, his own toxic behaviors, his own fears. It's a defense mechanism that allows him to avoid the painful but necessary confrontation with himself. This attitude reveals a chronic victim mentality, a stubborn refusal of the courageous but indispensable inner gaze, the one that allows us to face our own shadow, to integrate it and grow. And the danger for you is immense, because it is latent. This pattern, believe me, is very likely, if not certain, to repeat itself. If the current relationship were to deteriorate, if conflicts were to arise, which is inevitable in any human relationship, you risk, in turn, joining the inglorious pantheon of his crazy and toxic exes. This isn't to deny the possibility of genuinely difficult or unbalanced past relationships for him. That happens. But it's the systematic recurrence of this accusatory discourse, the total absence of nuance and personal self-reflection, that constitutes an unmistakable sign. Where is his responsibility in these failures? What lessons does he claim to have learned, if not how to better choose the next culprit? This raises a fundamental question about his ability to engage in a balanced partnership where each takes their share of responsibility. And this tendency to manipulate the perception of reality can take even more direct and personal forms. Now let's consider another phrase, a devastatingly effective weapon of emotional manipulation, because it directly attacks your feelings and your desire to prove your affection. If you really loved me, you would do what I ask. This is a phrase that seeps in like a slow, insidious poison, often under the guise of a supposed proof of love, a legitimate expectation from someone who feels entitled to your actions simply because your feelings exist. It's a form of emotional blackmail, sometimes subtle, sometimes openly asserted, but always incredibly destructive to the integrity of the relationship and your own equilibrium. It might seem, to a loving and devoted soul, like the expression of a sincere need, an understandable expectation. But more often than not, it's a manipulative pressure that uses your noblest feelings, your love, your loyalty, to exert control to get you to do something you wouldn't spontaneously do, or that goes against your own values or needs. True love, the kind that nourishes the soul, that elevates the vibrational frequency of each partner and the relationship itself, rests on solid foundations. Individual freedom, the deepest mutual respect, reciprocal admiration for who the other is not, for what they do for us. It never flourishes in guilt, coercion, or demands. When someone tells you, if you really loved me, you would do this or that, they're putting you in a false choice, a catch-22 where you lose no matter what you decide, give in to prove your love, and thus deny a part of yourself, or resist to preserve your integrity, and then be accused of not loving, of being selfish, insensitive. In both cases, a breach opens, a crack in trust and respect. Giving in to this type of blackmail, even once, is opening the door to a gradual loss of your authenticity, your inner voice. It's allowing your personal boundaries, so essential to your well-being, to erode bit by bit, like a cliff under the repeated assault of waves. Your inner strength, your ability to say no when necessary, diminishes. A dynamic of emotional submission, often unconscious at first, insidiously takes hold, and your personal power, your sovereignty over your own life, are dangerously diminished, transferred to the other. Love, true love, doesn't demand sacrificial proofs. It inspires joyful and consensual self-giving. It doesn't control. It liberates and encourages the other's growth. Never forget that. Your intrinsic worth isn't measured by your ability to satisfy the other's desires under emotional threat. This attempt at control can extend far beyond actions, meddling with your very being, your appearance, your most personal choices. And this brings us to another, equally pernicious category of remarks. Those aimed at molding you, at controlling you not just in your doing, but in your being. Imagine this question, tossed out with an air of false concern or barely veiled judgment. Are you going out like that? Or any other criticism, any judgmental, demeaning comment about your appearance, your hairstyle, your clothing choices, your friends, your passions, the way you laugh or express yourself. This isn't just a casual reproach, a clumsily expressed personal opinion. No, it's an insidious attack, a microaggression directed against your very identity, an attempt to undermine your confidence in your own essence, in your intrinsic personal worth. These words are like little drops of acid that, when repeated, eventually corrode self-esteem. The impact of these words, especially if they come from someone whose opinion or affection you value, can be devastating, even if it's not immediately perceptible. They instill doubt, shame, a diffuse but persistent feeling of never being good enough, of constantly having to watch yourself, correct yourself, adapt to please, to avoid criticism. The person uttering these words, consciously or not, often projects their own inner dissatisfaction, their own glaring lack of self-confidence, or an unhealthy need to dominate, to control their environment and the people in it, to feel they exist, to reassure themselves of their own value. By putting you down, they seek to elevate themselves by contrast, to keep you under their thumb by methodically eroding your self-esteem. It's a power strategy, often disguised as good advice or personal preferences. Remember and anchor this deeply within you, like an unshakable truth. Your true worth never, absolutely never depends on the judgment of others, no matter how close they are. It is intrinsic. It is your unique radiance, your energetic signature in this world. Falling into the trap of trying to conform to a vague, changing and often contradictory ideal dictated by the other is to lose yourself, to move away from your center. It's letting the other's shadow, their insecurities and desires for control, extinguish your own light, tarnish your colors. Stoic philosophy, so rich in lessons for our time, urges us to focus on our own virtue, on alignment with our values, and to wisely detach from external judgment, which is beyond our control. Distance yourself from those who seek to mold you to their narrow image instead of celebrating the magnificence of your unique being. Your intuition, that infallible compass, will tell you clearly if you take the time to listen to it in the silence of your heart, far from the noise of their criticisms. Sometimes control isn't expressed through direct criticism, but through an even more devious form of communication. And so we arrive at a seemingly innocuous phrase, almost an invitation to freedom, but which, uttered in a certain tone, with a certain energy, becomes a formidable emotional trap. Do whatever you want. This phrase, when tinged with biting irony, calculated coldness, or barely concealed resentment that hangs a palpable tension in the air, is one of the clearest manifestations of passive aggression. Far from being a genuine invitation to exercise your free will, it's an unacknowledged form of manipulation, where the man expects you to guess his expectations, his unexpressed desires, his hidden frustrations. He abdicates his responsibility to communicate clearly, transferring it entirely to you. By telling you do whatever you want in that tone, he puts you in an untenable position, a real emotional puzzle. If you make your own decisions following your desire or need, you risk a delayed reproach, a sulky silence that settles in for hours or days, exasperated sighs, or even a melodrama where he'll play the victim of your selfishness or lack of consideration. He thereby makes you responsible for his own frustration, his inability or refusal to clearly and healthily communicate his needs, limits, or disagreements. It's a way of making you feel guilty, of making you feel selfish, inadequate, or insensitive if you don't. By some miracle, read his mind, anticipate his secret desires. It's an immense and unfair burden. What's the countermove to this subtle but exhausting maneuver? Perhaps, and this is an act of true inner sovereignty, to take the phrase literally, with disarming serenity. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm going to do. This can have the effect of diffusing the manipulation, of short-circuiting the psychological game. It forces him, if he truly wants something different, to come out of the implicit, to finally engage in clear, honest, and authentic communication, where needs and expectations are expressed openly, not guessed in a subtle, draining, and profoundly sterile power game for the relationship. This encourages a dynamic where the responsibility for expressing needs is shared, not unilaterally borne by you. And after the missteps, the hurts, sometimes come the words that try to heal, but which can also hide an absence of any real will to change. That's why I'm going to share a final, sixth phrase, because in my opinion, it's essential. It's often uttered after a disturbing event, a verbal slip-up, a blatant lack of respect, words that can sound like a balm on a raw wound. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And sometimes, admittedly, the intention not to repeat it is sincere, authentic, felt in the moment. The intention can be pure. But how many times have you heard this promise, this vow? How many times has hope been rekindled by these words, only to be doused by the repetition of the same behavior, the same hurtful pattern? The danger here, the subtlety of the trap, is that these apologies, even if they seem sincere, can become a strategy, conscious or more often unconscious, to simply appease the immediate situation, to pour oil on troubled waters, as they say, to calm the storm that his own actions provoked. The unstated goal is then to reassure you, to raise your level of trust, and hope just enough for you to stay, for you to forgive before the next incident, the next transgression. You're lulled with fine words, cradled with illusions of change, but the deep behavioral patterns remain unchanged if no real work, no significant introspection, no concrete action is undertaken by the person. Actions will always be worth infinitely more than the most eloquent words or the most touching promises. A true realization, a real commitment to change, translates into lasting, observable, tangible behavioral transformation in the daily life of the relationship. If these apologies become a post-incident refrain, a broken record that repeats after each crisis, without anything fundamentally changing in attitude or actions, it's a clear and worrying sign that the toxic cycle is likely to continue, even strengthen. Trust, once broken, isn't rebuilt on words repeated like an empty mantra, but on concrete emotional security built day after day through proof of respect, consideration, and effective change. It's crucial to distinguish between fleeting contrition and profound transformation. So, the inevitable question, the one that often burns on the lips and weighs on the heart, arises. Why? Why, even when sensing these alarm bells, even when feeling this inner dissonance, this accumulating fatigue, do we sometimes remain trapped, sometimes for years, often unconsciously at first, in such detrimental relational dynamics? This is where the notion of personal power, vital energy, and the subtle mechanisms of the unconscious come into play crucially. When your personal power and energy are gradually, insidiously, handed over to the other, it's as if a part of you is slowly extinguishing, like a flame deprived of oxygen. Some modern spiritual approaches speak of energy vampirism, not in the literal caricatured sense of a mythical creature, but to describe an unbalanced relational dynamic where one partner, consciously or not, feeds on the energy, vitality, and light of the other, leaving the latter drained, exhausted, confused. Your decision-making ability, your once sharp discernment, diminishes. You start to doubt your own perceptions, your feelings. Am I the problem? Am I too sensitive, too demanding? You ask yourself, while your inner system screams the truth. It's a slow process of self-esteem erosion, where you end up devaluing yourself. The hope for change in the other, that very human, tenacious hope, can become a powerful anchor, but sometimes an illusory one that keeps you prisoner in a situation that costs you dearly on all levels: emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. Compulsive fears, often deeply rooted, also play a major role. The fear of losing the other, despite everything. The fear of loneliness, so terrifying for many. The fear of external judgment. The fear of failure. These fears can keep you in a situation that nevertheless causes you suffering and distances you from your fulfillment. The unconscious, that vast reservoir of past experiences and learned patterns, also plays its part. Sometimes we are drawn, like a magnet, to dynamics that painfully resonate with old, unhealed wounds, often stemming from childhood or previous relationships. We then unconsciously seek to repair the past through the present, to replay familiar scenarios in the hope of a different outcome this time. The other person then becomes, sometimes despite themselves, the mirror of our own unaddressed flaws, our own shadow to integrate, our own unmet needs for love and recognition. Breaking free from these bonds, these energetic and emotional entanglements, requires immense courage. The courage to look at yourself honestly and compassionately, and above all, the courage to choose yourself, to recognize and affirm that your well-being, your energy, your inner peace, your joy of living are precious, sacred, and non-negotiable. It's an act of inner sovereignty, a declaration of love for oneself, which is the foundation of any healthy and balanced relationship with others. It's a path of reclaiming oneself, not always easy, but so liberating. These 5 phrases, and their corollary in the form of repetitive excuses, despite their sometimes harmless, sometimes even seductive appearance at first glance, are all crucial alarm signals little white pebbles strewn on your path to alert you. They can be indicators of relationships that, far from helping you flourish and supporting your growth, risk dragging you into downward spirals, exhausting and profoundly imbalanced on an energetic and emotional level. The invitation today is not to become excessively suspicious, to close your heart, or to see evil everywhere. Far from it. It's rather to sharpen your discernment, to cultivate your inner wisdom, to learn to trust your most subtle feelings, not to stop at the spoken words, at the surface of things, but to seek to identify repetitive behavioral patterns, underlying intentions, the overall energetic resonance of the relationship. Your emotional balance, your vitality, are treasures to be protected with vigilance and love. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca, whose wisdom transcends centuries to enlighten us still today, so rightly said, "Life is long if you know how to use it, but most men do not know how to choose the people to whom they devote their time." This reflection is strikingly relevant today. Be attentive. Be present to yourselves, to detect the deep, potentially dangerous, or simply depleting dynamics that can hide behind these seemingly banal phrases. It's an act of self-preservation, to avoid draining relationships that would lead to self-betrayal, to straying from one's essence. True love, the kind that makes the soul grow, the kind that is a source of mutual joy and inspiration, always expresses itself with transparency, unconditional respect, and courageous honesty. It doesn't seek to diminish the other, to control or manipulate them, but to see them radiate in all their splendor, to support their fulfillment. Inner peace, that quest so essential to our happiness, that deep aspiration of every human soul, is built and maintained when our thoughts, words, and actions are in harmony, and when we choose to surround ourselves with people and relationships that honor and nourish this harmony. If these reflections, these explorations of relational depths resonate with you today, if you feel an inner call to honor your personal power to cultivate healthier relationships more aligned with your values and deep aspirations, then I invite you to take a step. Perhaps you can comment below, as a commitment to yourself: "I choose my alignment and my inner peace." Share this transmission, if it has touched you, with those around you who might need to hear this message, to receive this key to understanding. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss our next journeys into the heart of inner wisdom, to discover the hidden treasures within you. Never forget, and let this resonate within you for a long time like a breath of truth. You are the guardian of your energy, the sovereign of your inner kingdom. Choose wisely, with love and discernment, those to whom you give access to your secret garden, to your sacred space. May your unique and precious light guide each of your steps on the path of life.